A lot of people are talking about the threat of nuclear war. Elon Musk said the risk has almost never been bigger, while other billionaires like Peter Thiel have been prepared for it by having their apocalypse bunkers in New Zealand and citizenship to go with it. The truth is that modern nuclear weapons are 20 to 30 times more powerful than those that were used on Japan less than a century ago. Today, I'm not going to explain why you should be concerned about nuclear war, or even if you should. But if you are, today I'm going to tell you places that you can go to protect yourself from possible nuclear risks. You can look online, and if you speak English, you'll probably find articles like the ones I did on Newsweek that talk about best places to escape nuclear war in the United States. Most people think about how they can do this in their own country, but of course here at Nomad Capitalist we say, how do we escape nuclear war in other countries? Because chances are your country's not number one at anything, and certainly not at everything, and that goes to escaping a war. So the idea that Newsweek talks about parts of Maine and Oregon and Northern California and Western Texas, that's interesting, but as Robert Kiyosaki told our audience at Nomad Capitalist Live a couple of years ago, where can you go in 3 days? And it should be some other country because, again, your country isn't number one. Let's talk about what you want. The first thing that comes up when people talk about escaping this is food production. Experts say in a worst-case scenario, this could be reduced by 80 to 100% in affected areas. And so it's not just about you not getting wiped off the map, but are you going to have something to eat? And so what some experts have said is that superpowers like China, Russia, and the U.S. may experience significant drops in food production during a nuclear winter. And imagine what happens if people don't even have the basics. I mean, we've seen what happens for far less and seen some of the civil unrest in Western countries, whether it's France, whether it's Spain, whether it's the U.S. We've seen how people react. Imagine people don't have food and what's going to be the fallout effect of that. Not only that you can't eat, but what's happening around you. What's happening even if you have food. People talk about, oh, I'm going to invest in my seeds. The comedian Bill Burr says, if in some kind of situation like this, you're the guy with the food, you're basically just, growing supplies for the guys who are tougher than you, for the angry mob who overtakes you. Food production is a big one. The other thing you want to have is some kind of energy self-sufficiency. That may be on your own property, or that may just be the place that you're in has functioning energy. For me, again, I just want to go somewhere on the map where these problems aren't going to be as prevalent. And again, I'm sharing the facts if this is something that you're worried about. You may not be worried about it at all, but hopefully it sparks some thinking. Now, one comment, this is from a associate professor at a university in Sweden. His name is Dr. Mark St. Foreman. He says, I'm of the view that a rural area, which is not downwind of an obvious target, is the best place if you want to avoid fallout of other effects of the bomb. A good place would be a valley where the hills would give you some protection from heat and blast from bombs, which go off miles away from where you are. And so what some of the most commonly named places in the world, not Newsweek's U.S., but in the world, are Australia and New Zealand. I'm going to tell you why I don't think those are exactly what most people can do or are looking for in a minute. But the reason is robust agriculture, far from the Northern Hemisphere, very well isolated. But here are the negatives. One professor said, you can imagine there will be flotillas of hungry refugees from Asia on their way there. Not sure exactly what I think about that, but okay. Also, Australia does have one major factor working against it, says one expert. Relatively close military ties with the UK and the US make it more likely to become a target in a nuclear war. Obviously, we're not wishing that on anybody, but you look at Five Eyes, you look at, obviously not Australia, but other countries in NATO, any kind of alliance where people are working together, you kind of think, okay, we lump those in. That's why, for me, countries in Europe that are interesting, Ireland and Switzerland, both have tax friendliness for foreigners. Austria is not part of a lot of these alliances, although they are part of the EU. Those countries, to me, stand out among a lot of more poorly performing countries in Europe. But obviously, if something happens in the UK and you're in Ireland, well, okay, you're going to feel it more than you're going to feel it in Argentina or in Australia. One person says is that he has false security for New Zealand because the country no longer has any facility refining fuel and is intensely dependent on imports for the diesel, pesticides, machinery needed to sustain its dominant agriculture sector. And so I kind of look at Australia and New Zealand as brand names, both for immigration from certain kinds of people. Again, Peter Thiel got citizenship in New Zealand many years ago, and you think, hey, if the world falls apart, how much further away from the rest of the world can you get than New Zealand? Well, we'll talk about some in a minute. Places like Vanuatu are just a little bit further away. We've just seen a new president elected in Argentina. I mean, there's interesting places that are equally as far away. I look at these two as brand names. Here's the problem. Residence in Australia and New Zealand has become incredibly expensive. There's some talk that maybe they'll lower their prices, but I mean, they shot up into as high as the 8 figures in their own local currency that you have to invest to get an investment residence. Now, maybe you can go and you can get a job there if you want to move and you want to pay taxes and you want to actually live there. That's different. And if that's how you want to prepare, go for it. But if you just want an option in your back pocket where maybe you go and visit a little bit every year, but generally speaking, you're not moving and you have a residence permit that's in your back pocket, as we say, it's going to cost you millions in many cases to get into Australia and New Zealand. And on top of that, obviously taxes aren't your biggest concern if there's a nuclear war going on. New Zealand does have some elements of tax friendliness, which have kind of been chipped away at a little bit, but neither of these are exactly tax haven countries. And if you ever decided, hey, before the nuclear war, I want to get out of my country for some reason, they wouldn't be the best residence permits, in my opinion, not because of the high cost and the opportunity cost of investing to get their investor visas, because if you ever wanted to live there for some other reason, you may be, locking yourself into more taxes than you could have by moving somewhere else. And so it's a very expensive proposition to go to those countries, although they are some of the most commonly named countries when people talk about where can you go to escape the nuclear war. Kind of the most commonly discussed thing is go to somewhere in the Southern Hemisphere. And I think there's a certain bias because we consume content in English that people who speak English want to go somewhere that speaks English. And they want to kind of recommend those places that are in the bubble. And so let's get out of the bubble. One of the overlooked places, I think, is the Pacific Islands. Now, people have mentioned, hey, during World War II, the U.S. did testing in some of the islands, but let's talk about places where you can go. One expert said there are just a few island nations that could continue to produce enough food to feed their population after an abrupt sunlight-reducing catastrophe, such as a nuclear war, supervolcano, or asteroid strike. My goodness. These countries include the Solomon Islands and one we've talked about here before, Vanuatu. Fiji was also mentioned in some other papers that I read. Now, I think Fiji has a residence program, hardly a tax haven as well. One place where you could easily get access is Vanuatu. Vanuatu has both a residence program for folks who make a smaller investment or a citizenship program for folks who are willing to either make a donation, invest in government bonds for as little as 2 or 3 years. They've got a new program investing in coconuts. You get part of your money back. But for a low 6-figure sum, you can get citizenship in Vanuatu. I hesitate to say that in the sense of it's not the best citizenship program. I think there are better options out there. But if I'm building a passport portfolio, which is something that we help our clients do in many cases, and I'm getting a second and a third passport that protect my ability to leave my country if I have to. I can travel on those. I have places that I can live. Somewhere down the roster, I might eventually want to get a passport in a place where, hey, I'm probably never going to want to live here, and it's not great for traveling. If I can afford, nuclear war insurance, you know what? Rather than, spending $500,000 or $1 million on these old, missile silos people clear out in, Iowa or whatever, and you're still in the same country that may have a problem, I'd rather get citizenship in some other country that may serve me in some other ways and have the ability to go to Vanuatu. Vanuatu passport comes with a few, weird benefits. It's a place that probably is easier to get to if you live in Asia. But hey, if you can fly from LA to Fiji, it's a hop over to Vanuatu. And so that's a country that for a low 6-figure amount, maybe rather than an 8-figure amount, you can get into. You can have that access for the rest of your life. If you ever have to go, you're a citizen. Because imagine, something terrible is happening in the world. If everyone's trying to get to safety, what happens to visa policies? What happens to restrictions? We saw what happened during COVID. What happens if something changes? Are they going to want people from the Northern Hemisphere to come to their country? Well, if you're a citizen, there may be a different policy there. You can come in as their citizen. And so the Pacific Islands, particularly those sovereign countries, are overlooked. It may be a reason to look at Vanuatu residents at least. Maybe the citizenship doesn't work for other stuff you're doing. That's a question that we would ask you if you were working with us. But maybe having a residence permit there isn't the worst thing, particularly if you can do that long term. Argentina is another one that's not as well talked about, but did come up in some of the research that I did. New president coming in Argentina. You can get residence in Argentina. You don't even have to have a 6-figure sum. You have to have an income. Barely $1,000 a month gets you residence there. Now, if you don't live in Argentina, they may cancel your residence eventually when it comes time to renew it. And so keeping it as a back pocket option, it's a little bit up to the circumstances at the time of renewal. But I'll tell you what, getting citizenship in Argentina, live there for 2 years, we'll see what happens with taxes with this new president, may be an interesting proposition for some folks. And you are far away from it all, but you're also connected to lots of agricultural options. You've got other, countries nearby. You've got, just the diversity of Argentina is incredible. And you are about as far down there as you can get. And by the way, probably an easier place to get to if things get a little harried. And for folks who may just want to go and put some time in there now, much better time zone to work from than Vanuatu. But Argentina is one that has come up as well. Another one in Europe that constantly comes up as an excellent country for peace and for security and for safety. Number one on the Global Peace Index every year is Iceland. Because Iceland is isolated from the rest of the world by the North Atlantic Ocean, it would be very difficult for a nuclear missile to reach Iceland without being detected first, said one policy paper. They've got geothermal sources for energy. Here's the play there. If you're a citizen of an EU member state, Iceland is not a member, but they do allow people from the EU to come and live there as of right. So Iceland and Norway and Switzerland, each could be interesting from a low tax standpoint of view, such as a foreigner who moves to Switzerland, takes advantage of the lump sum program, or if you wanted to live in some times of crisis up in a place like Norway or Iceland. If you have an EU country passport, you can get that by descent. Let's say you have a parent, a grandparent, in some cases a great-grandparent, or even a great-great-grandparent in some cases, from Italy, from Hungary. We help a lot of people do that. We just had a family of 7 people with Italian descent come in. Now, it's going to take probably a couple years for them to get everybody their passports. But they will be able to be Italian, and they'll be able to live in Italy. They'll be able to go there whenever they want. They don't have to live there if they don't want to. They don't have to pay taxes if they don't live there. But as Italians, they can go and live in other tax-friendly countries in Europe. Could be Malta, could be Ireland, could be Switzerland, but they can also go live in places like Iceland when things get tough. And so I don't know that getting a residence permit in Iceland's the answer, but if you're in Europe, you get one passport, you have the option. If you don't have descent, Malta has a program. You can donate money. You can get a passport for your whole family in about 18 months. We've got more people very interested in that. It's probably not going to be around forever. So if it's of interest to you and you have $1 million to spare to get citizenship, basically your entire family tree will be changed with access to live, work, study, whatever in Europe, not just in the case of a nuclear war, but there could be potential tax incentives to live in many different European countries. It gives you close to 30 countries to live in when times get tough for whatever reason. And if you want access to a place like Iceland that's well protected, I think that's not a bad option to have. Certainly kind of in the middle of, 2 places that are very much on the radar, but the experts say it's so far isolated that you would be well protected. They have the energy sources, food. Maybe in that winter, they're not growing a lot of carrots and potatoes, but you have plenty of food. Obviously, one of the reasons that Norway, for example, never joined the EU was the fisheries policy. Plenty of fish to eat there in Iceland. And of course, in the U.S., they mention different places. However, the U.S. is already not cohesive, and what one expert in one of these policy papers said is that the likely collapse of industry and social cohesion will put the U.S. resilience in doubt. People in the U.S. are already at each other's throats in a way that I don't see in really any other country. I talk to people who are pretty patriotic, and even they are saying it has changed dramatically. I talked to my grandmother the other day. She said it's nothing like what you left not that many years ago. The social cohesion is terrible. I don't really see anybody else in the world talking about their country in the same way. And so for me, the idea that I'm American, I'm just going to hang out and hope for the best. This is obviously, listen, who knows what the risk of this is? Nuclear war, we get hit. Pretty scary thought. And the question is, what percentage is that to happen? What percentage is another pandemic to happen? What percentage is higher taxes to happen? What percentage is just, social unrest, civil war? There's a lot of threats out there. Where would you go? I happen to think that a passport portfolio, perhaps one passport in Europe, as much as people think, oh, well, Europe's going in the wrong direction, at least you have access to a lot of different countries and there's still some sovereignty. And again, when you throw in the Icelands and the Switzerlands and those, and the access you have, they still beat to their own drum to some extent. You've got a lot of different places to choose from, no matter, depending on what the threat is. You throw that in with some other residence permits, let's say in a place like Argentina. Maybe you do something in a place like Vanuatu. Maybe you get something in Asia. maybe you look at those criteria. Where can I find, the protection from heat, a valley where the hills will give you protection? I mean, there's plenty of places. I think having a residence and citizenship portfolio helps with all the stuff we told you about for years. Helps you with personal freedom, helps you with making sure you have financial freedom, asset protection, and lower taxes. But if this kind of stuff concerns you, we talked about World War III and where to go. We talked about what's happening now with Israel and Palestine, Russia and Ukraine. Who knows what could happen next? Who knows who could be a target? I think the only way to solve that and to make sure you can get in is to be more than a guest, more than a tourist. It's to be a resident, or it's ultimately to be a citizen. And obviously, when something bad happens, you're not going to call up and say, hey, can I be a citizen? When COVID really got intense and people were freaking out, our phone was ringing off we couldn't keep up. Now we've built structures. Now we're more staffed. Now we have more people trained, and we're ready. But you don't want to be the one, trying to, how do I get a passport in 1 month? How do I get a residence permit? How do I get out of here? I don't know. I'm trapped. I'm sorry. I don't, Canada won't let me leave, whatever. You want to get this stuff set up early. You want to have your plan set up early. Nomad Capitalist helps people make plans. I'll leave it up to you how much of a threat each of these things are to you and your family. But knowing all the different options available, making them all work holistically, nobody does it like Nomad Capitalist does. We've looked. Go to nomadcapitalist.com, learn how we can help you, learn how you can learn about all the different options, including all the ones you probably haven't heard of, for lowering your taxes, protecting your assets, ensuring your personal freedom, and protecting your safety.